I'm just tired of asking the answer always the same. Brothers want something to happen and we must step up for change. I'm tired.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair?
Tired.
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin?
But we just playing the game and we don't know none of the rules. That's how we acquiesce, end up with less and look like some fools. I'm tired.
Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose?
I'm tired.
And the shape of your lips?
What's good, everybody? It's your boy, the Black Academic here, and we just now finished up chapter 1, which was discussing white power and how it set up this colonial situation between us, the subjugated, and our oppressors and whatnot. So now that we're about to dive into chapter 2, which is about black power, distinguishing the difference between black power and white power. And I hope that you guys enjoy this content. If you are, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe, and share. Please. It's much appreciated. But without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so chapter 2, Black Power, Its Need and Substance. So the first quote right here is by V.O. Key Jr. In Politics, Parties, Pressure Groups, page 57 in that book, but page 34 in Black Power. This quote here says, to carve out a place for itself in the political social order, a new group may have to fight for reorientation of many of the values of the old order. In the book, they just said themselves, this is by Kwame, Ture, and Charles V. Hamilton, where they said, Black people in the United States must raise hard questions, questions which challenge the very nature of the society itself, its long-standing values, beliefs, and institutions. So here's the thing. It is essential for us to understand that this country was never really built for us. The people who wrote the Constitution, over half of them had captives. Over half of them enslaved people. The biggest hypocrite of them all was Thomas Jefferson, which had a whole family with Sally Hemings and everything. He basically blackmailed her to come back to the States with him when they went off to France. So you first have to, people that want to be constitutionalist or people that want to actually sit here and think that we can play this game must first understand that everything that was written about this game was not set up for us. It was set up to exploit us in the first place. So we got to get away from the idea that the Constitution is some inerrant, infallible piece of work, because this was written 300 years ago. You know, how in the world could a flawed people write something that they think is so perfect? How when there's been societies and institutions and great works written way before them. Again, this is the people that don't learn from the past. These were the outcasts. These were the people that Europe was sitting there saying, we don't want y'all anymore because y'all been acting a fool over here. Again, they had we're sending indentured servants over here. These were people coming over here where they were coming over here for new opportunities because they were not finding them at home. So you got to remember, these are not the ones that were living in high accords with the well-established order back in Europe. Now, this parallels why it's important as men not to forget about our women in our fight for revolution, because we can't be hypocrites as well. We can't be hypocrites just like them and become oppressors ourselves, because these were an oppressed people. They were fighting off their oppressor, Revolutionary War. Then they sat there, turned around, flipped the script, and started oppressing other people. We have to make sure that in our plight, we're not going to sit there and oppress others that are also on the same team with us. We can't just be about Black men. That's why most people say now that when somebody says Black Lives Matter, they're saying all of them matter, because at times people act like there are certain groups that don't matter, even though they're Black themselves. So we must always remember that and learn from that so that we don't become an oppressor ourselves. This quote here they have on page 37 said, when we begin to define our own image, the Black community will have a positive image of itself that it has created. Okay, so the first thing here is that we must first redefine ourselves, reclaim our history and our identity. Why this is important is because this is the first thing that gets us away from the oppressor, getting away from that mindset that they've already given us, that they've created and established for us. Um, we can't really accept our oppressor's definitions and historical descriptions of things, because in doing so, we are also giving psychological control over to them. When you're a child and your parents tell you that Santa Claus is coming to give you gifts and everything, in your head you start believing Santa Claus is real. Now, there's many out here now, like myself, that are never going to tell their kids Santa Claus is real, because we know how the joke goes. Ain't no white man about to come up in here and down a chimney without getting one shot, two, and sit there and give my kids some gifts, and then they get all the credit for all the work that you've done the 364 other days of the year. Nah, we all know that that's not happening, right? So, but that when you create that narrative for that child, they have no other thing to compare it to, no other experience to compare that to, then they're going to take that for face value. They're going to take that for what it is. You are structuring their mind around a fallacy, essentially. So, for instance, an example is American propaganda. They want to make us at times believe that we won the Vietnam War. No, we didn't. And that wasn't even a war. That was terrorism. That was an act of terrorism. But they don't come out and say that. Um, they're going to call all of our uprisings riots so that it creates a certain point of view. Like, these aren't just riots coming out of nowhere. Nah, there's a cause and effect. What started that? What started that rebellion? What started that uprising? It's not just, we don't just go out there and just act a fool for nothing. Um, so they also bring up the fact that they renamed the natives so that they could treat them a certain way. Amos Wilson has a quote where he says, in his quote, now we know today we say indigenous or Native Americans, but he says, you called the Indians savages so you could treat them like savages. You called us criminals so that you could treat us like criminals. And they continue that today. And the second thing that he says is, we have to call forth the process of political modernization. Now, this is one I really like to theorize about, because I like to ask people, like, how in the world do we have updates to our phones and everything on a consistent basis? How do we have subscriptions that get updated on a consistent basis, but our Constitution doesn't? That's one question I've always liked to ask, which apparently they've already asked as well. So they're saying that we have to modernize our systems here. So these are the three major concepts of political modernization. Where first, we have to question old values and institutions of the society. We know that because they're not made for us. So we can't necessarily assimilate into a society's ideals, because those values and ideals that they have permit the perpetuation of our oppression. So all of those values and everything, their values is material gains instead of humanization of people and being human to people. Total hypocrites saying that it's a free market, but you deny opportunities to other people to play in that market. In the middle class, they said that the middle class of this society is literally the backbone of institutional racism, because those are the people that are comfortable. Those are the people that actually believe in these American values and everything, and don't necessarily have to be next to the exploited people. They don't see the people in Congo having to dig in that dirt all the time, not even being able to go home and have a break or anything, because they're over here living a luxurious life. No. Two, they say that we should be searching for new and different forms of political structures to solve political and economic problems. Now, most people here, I'm actually gonna go ahead and play a video for this, because I believe Kwame Ture can explain this a little better than I can.
Socialism hasn't gone anywhere. It has been betrayed, yes. But betrayal doesn't mean collapse. Perhaps they get confused because at least Judas had the dignity after betraying Christianity to hang himself. Gorbachev is still running around the world picking up pieces of silver. Must be clear here and not confused. I'm a socialist. One other thing I must tell you now. They confuse people about socialism. Brother the other day said, why ain't no socialist? I said, why not, brother? He said, because it's a white thing. I said, oh, really? You see, Europe tries to make believe that everything that comes out of the world comes out of Europe. I told the man, I said, socialism ain't no white thing. He said, yes, it is. He said, Karl Marx discovered it. I told him, Karl Marx never discovered socialism. He cannot. You call the laws of gravity Newton's laws. I'm sure there's a mnemonic device to help you on your quizzes. But you certainly cannot believe that Isaac Newton can found that a body falls at the rate of 32 feet per second squared per second squared. He can't find this. He can't discover it. He cannot invent this. He can only observe it and record it, discover the law. If I'm sitting in Timbuktu in Africa and I've never heard of Sir Isaac Newton and I'm conducting any experiments with gravity, I will come to the same conclusion that he does. A body in motion tends to stay in motion unless stopped by an outside force. He cannot invent this. He can only observe it and record it. Karl Marx did not invent socialism. If I'm sitting in Libya, in the deserts, and I'm doing any research with capital and labor without ever having heard of Karl Marx, I will come to the same conclusion that he did. That any time capital seeks to dominate labor, there'll be a ruthless, uncompromising struggle on the part of labor until it comes to crush capital and dominate it. This is a fact. My history demonstrates that. We came here as chattel slaves for centuries. We fought and fought and fought until we crushed it. Now we're just slave of the wage, and now we've got to rise up and crush that one. That's to declare that Karl Marx didn't invent socialism. It's there for all to see. Karl Marx's great contribution to the world was in the area of historical materialism and dialectical materialism, something you need to know if you know about socialism. But since you don't know about socialism, you don't even know the words. And not only does the enemy keep you ignorant, you stay ignorant. You won't ever go read a book about socialism. Why read a book about socialism? They already told me in my class it ain't no good. You will not even read a book about socialism. Why, you don't even read a book about your history. We come to inspire you to learn. We come to tell you that when you come to serve a people, you must know as much as you can. The more you know, the better able you are to serve the people.
So essentially, we have to modernize this entire country. You know, we actually have to go out and search for these different systems because, as you see in the video, Kwame Ture talks about socialism, for instance, as an example. You can mention socialism or communism here and people are going to act a fool, something like that, and that you're an enemy of all people and you are so backwards and you're just trying to kill the entire country, and that's false. Okay, as he said, I'm pretty sure these people have not read a single book on these things. And for the Black community that looks at socialism as if it is a white thing, well, like he says, Marx could only analyze this. He didn't create this. But who do you think he was analyzing? Africa. Africa is the original socialist society. Africa is, as we know, is communal. We're a communal people. That's how our culture is. To coin the terms of Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Western culture is normally valued in death, domination, and destruction. As we see, that's how capitalism ends up. Intrinsically, somebody is dying, somebody's getting exploited, somebody is being destroyed, a community being destroyed. Whereas you flip it in Africa, in its original heritage, it's communal. These are not complicated things that people try to make this seem. As Kwame Ture always says, judge these things based off of their principles. Okay? So inherently, when we're questioning all of these things, this quote at the bottom relates to point number 2, right? He says, we cannot then proceed to transform that system with existing structures. They go on to say the difference, they define system as the entire American complex of basic institutions, values, beliefs, etc. Structures are the specific institutions, political parties, interest groups, bureaucratic administrations, which exist to conduct the business of that system. Okay, so there's no way we can transform this or change this sticking with what we already have. Third, he says that we must begin broadening the base of political participation to include more people in the decision-making process. Now, they give out some quotes in here that emphasize the importance of this, right? So when we broaden our base, We're allowing more people to be involved, more conscious development to be involved, more unity to come about with this. And in doing so, we have to get away from being tied up to small incentives or handouts from those corruptive people in this white machine. Okay, that, for instance, that individual, as I spoke about earlier, the individual that makes it to the next level, or somebody, for instance, like a Colin Powell, just gets in a position so that they can say, look, this black man made it, y'all can too. you know we can't take those token positions thinking that's a way of, hey, we done made it, or this is progression or anything, right? uh they also go on to say Negroes tend to be the objects rather than the subjects of civic action. Things are often done for, or about, or to, or because of Negroes, but they are less frequently done by Negroes. Okay, so therefore, we need to be in those positions of power. We have to get our people in there, so that we can actually have representation of our true wants and values. In broadening this base, this is not just saying that it has to just be for anybody else is watching this. This is something that works for everybody. Okay, we're not saying, oh, we just want black people in there and that's it. No, if your group needs this as well, like that is what you have to do. You've broadened the base. You can't just sit here and have it all one-sided, because then that's how that oppression continues. So I'm gonna move this out of the way one more time. Here are the fundamentals of black power, which is black unity, heritage recognition, sense of community, autonomy, rejection of racist institutions, and empowerment. None of that has to do with going out and just killing a whole bunch of other white folks. Okay. If anybody says they believe that black power is like reverse racism, they don't understand what this is really about then. The quote up here says, before a group of people can enter the open society, it must first close ranks. By this, we mean that group solidarity is necessary before a group can operate effectively from a bargaining position of strength in a pluralistic society. Basically, these 6 points right here are needed to actually go out there and play that game. We can't have individuals trying to represent an entire community that hasn't closed their ranks first, that hasn't come together to unify on what that unity looks like, what that community looks like, what that autonomy looks like. What is your objective? What is your actual goals? How do you want to go about them? You can't play that game without that. So that's essentially what they're saying. They also talked about how there's a need for a greater independence, for us to lead and run our own organizations, to achieve self-identity and self-determination. The talks just, we just want more of us in position of power, but black visibility is not black power. Black domination is also not black power. The goal is full participation in the decision-making processes affecting the lives of black people. Relating this to women's reproductive rights, I personally do not believe men should be voting on what women do with their bodies. I'm not a part of those people. I'm not a part of that section of our species. Therefore, how can I relate to that? I can't tell you like, yo, you need to be, letting that baby come on, pop it out. I don't care how you got it. I don't care if you can afford it. I don't care if you're gonna sit there and become less beneficial to society just because you can't take care of your child, which is going to have long lasting effects on you, that child, and your relationship, and anybody else that y'all come in contact with. I don't care. That's what they're saying. Where in reality, I personally don't think that anybody should be making that decision that is not in that group. And that's essentially what they're saying here, is that we want to be able to self-govern. We want to be able to say, this is what we want, this is how we want to do it. this is what we're doing, and not have to have somebody else sit there and think just because we're progressing, we're taking anything away from them. That only works if we play the capitalist game the way they play it, because then we will have to oppress them. We will have to oppress somebody else. That is how capitalism works. But we don't have to be that way. That's just the way they see it. They recognize that the people are above the individual. The people are who give the individual power. Um, in Black domination, they recognize that these values, we want an effective share in total power of the society. We don't want the total power of society. Key words: effective share in the total power. Okay, so here I just put a picture of Angela Davis, Kwame Ture, and Barbara Easley, who was also an activist back in the day. And she's still currently, she still does do work as well. So look her up as well if you get the chance to. But I put them here just because, again, we have to do this collectively. We can't do this alone. It can't just be the Black man. It can't just be the Black woman. We don't want domination. It has to be an effective share. Okay. We all know how impactful and powerful Angela Davis is. Where would some people be today without her? Where would some people be today if our entire society was still stuck in Eurocentric ideas where, yeah, that white woman can't do nothing. Yeah, women ain't doing nothing. You stay your butt in the kitchen. Where would we be if it was like that? Angela Davis is someone I have been inspired by. I personally would have never known about our connection with the Palestinians if it wasn't for her and her book Freedom is a Constant Struggle. It just never clicked in my head why we were connected, how we were connected. But as we see, powerful woman, powerful message, powerful change. We can all do this together. That's how it's supposed to be. The people versus the individual, the people over the individual, effective share in power, not domination of power. So I wanted to read a segment of the book on page 48 by the National Council of Churches, where they published in the New York Times of July 31st, 1966. I'm gonna read this small little portion where it says the conscience of Black men is corrupted because having no power to implement the demands of conscience, the concern for justice in the absence of justice becomes chaotic self-surrender. Powerlessness breeds a race of beggars. We are faced with a situation where powerless conscience meets conscienceless power, threatening the very foundation of our nation. And again, this was 1966, but as you see, we're still dealing with this. Um, they state that no other group would submit to being led by others. I relate this to where it's like anytime Black people call for all Black ran organizations, next thing you know, it's just looked at as being bad. In the book, they said that they classed that with the KKK somehow, some way. As you can see, recently this year there was 19 Black families that came together and bought 97 acres here in Georgia. That got met with people saying that this was like reverse racism. How? Their whole goal was to come together to develop a Black town that was a safe haven. They didn't say no white people could move there. They do have white people there. They didn't say no non-Black people were allowed to come up in here. No, what they're saying is we want a safe haven for Black people to be able to know that this is a safe place for them to come to, that the ones that own this property in this land, again, slave catchers were only here to protect property, but the property was Black people. Slave catchers end up becoming police. Police are only here to protect property. So therefore, with them being the owners of that property, that gives them power, okay? And that allows us to have a safe haven. How somebody comes to the conclusion that that is reverse racism is beyond me, but reflects what we've been doing for years, or what we've been facing for years. Anytime we want to come together, it gets looked at as reverse racism or that it's negative. This will be my last slide here, and I labeled it civil rights to Black power. Now here's where they say that The language of yesterday is indeed irrelevant. Progress, nonviolence, integration, fear of white backlash, and coalition. These are the type of words you have to look for, okay? Now, they say when people say, this is what happened back then. Let me move this so y'all can see the image. So, back then, you have the civil rights movement, but this never really actually tapped into the ethos of the community or the youth of the community, because what happened right after the Black Panthers were made, right after you have the Black Liberation Army and all this stuff, like it seemed as though the moderate groups of middle class Black people or Black people that were leading these movements never really could tap into that energy, and were just a buffer between the Black youth that really were starting to become militant and the white middle class. And that's essentially what civil rights movement started to become. Like they would claim to speak for the community, but you never really spoke the same way that the community really spoke amongst each other. The community will sit there and watch MLK get slapped up and get angry, watch church bombings and get angry, see nothing happen and get angry again, then watch their brothers and sisters go out there and do the same thing again and get slapped up again. And Malcolm X, y'all can look him up, and all that he says about that, I agree with. I don't necessarily myself, and as they have here, they don't believe in that, you know. Um, they put in here saying that Congress passed civil rights law after civil rights law, only to have them effectively nullified by deliberately weak enforcement. So none of these laws really mean anything. And that relates me to, I believe it was, since I'm here in Georgia, we have a governor in Brian Kemp. This summer, past summer, he signed this anti-hate bill or something like that, right? He only signed that to save face. Okay, if you look in history, you'll see that a lot of these bills were signed by Republicans at during time, or bills that were supposed to help us, but were during times when it was a lot of turmoil. So they weren't about to just sit there and just sign them out of nothing. They were signed because they were pressured to. They were signed because they were uncomfortable. Going back to white people are mad about injustice, at least the masses collectively. There may be individuals that are. They're more mad about being uncomfortable and people sitting there messing up their business and their day. You know, that's really what it's about. So they said that language such as progress is being made misleads us into believing that a Black minority could bow its head and get whipped into a meaningful position of power. So then they go into saying that language of nonviolence developed the thought that Black people shouldn't or wouldn't fight back during this time period. And they reject this notion, saying that Black people should and must fight back. That is just a human right to life, where they said if a nation fails to protect its citizens, then that nation cannot condemn those who take up the task themselves. What man would not defend his family and home from attack? An example of this would have been the Deacons of Defense. Then they put this in the book as well, where for time and time, the Deacons of Defense, well, people in Mississippi during this time period were being terrorized by the KKK. They're letting the government know, like, look, we getting messed up over here. We need some help. Never came. The Deacons of Defense were some Black brothers that were formerly in the military that got together and said, look, we ain't doing this no more. And this was before the Black Panthers. And so, look, we're not dealing with this anymore. We about to fight back themselves. When they fought back, that's when the government and the National Guard and all them wanted to come in and everything. That's when they wanted to help, because they know that they're not going to lie down anymore. And these are literally like formations or things that are starting to shift us to getting towards the Black Panthers and Black Liberation Army, and moving on to where we eventually get to Black Lives Matter. But they also said that there can be no social order without social justice. So if you're not going to give me that justice, then we have to fight for that ourselves. You know, it's not something that we can't just wait for somebody else to give that. We have to fight for it. Whether it's, again, in the words of Frederick Douglass, whether it's words or blows or both, it's up to you. Um, they said that integration is based on the assumption that there is nothing of value in the Black community and that little of value could be created among Black people. Now, this goes again, going back to not really loving yourself and loving your people and believing in that white ideology of, for instance, we saying like, oh, Black people are so loud, or Black people just can't get right, Black people this and that. Like, nah, we have value and we do contribute, and we have a rich, vast culture. Like, when you dive into it, you realize you have the world, and you're not what white society tells you that you are. So this was similar to like when Ibram X. Kendi has the book Stamped, and they're talking about assimilationists. Uh, these integrationists were essentially assimilationists, and assimilate. So he set it up from segregationists that don't even want to be together. They don't want Black and white people together at all. You got assimilationists that want to assimilate into that mainstream society, and mainstream society is only going to accept you if you are what they want you to be. Then you have the anti-racists, but we'll get into that book another time as well. Um, and at the time period, I would have to say that Kwame Ture and all of them were focusing on creating an anti-racist society. This integration meant that to have a decent house or education, Black people must move into a white neighborhood or send their children to a white school. But that is the total opposite of Black power, because this is counterproductive to the goal, which is to build strength within our communities. So taking your child out of the community isn't really helping our community as a collective. So how can we be great if we leave behind who we are? This kind of integration is to be in cahoots with middle class white aspirations. But as we know, these aspirations leave the Black community dry. Only token Black people fit into this molds. And these are the ones that are just like OJ Simpson, that prefer to be treated as an individual, not a Black person. You know, this is where you have to realize that we have not suffered as individuals. As they said in this book, Black people have not suffered as individuals, but as members of a group. Therefore, their liberation lies in group action. So no matter what, you cannot run away from your skin. You are in the group no matter what. Now, the fear of white backlash. Now, they said white backlash is something totally different. Okay, it's not. They say that when you organize, counter organizations are going to happen. Obviously, so we have, think about modern day. You got Black Lives Matter. What came out right after? All Lives Matter. What came out right after that? Blue Lives Matter. They said organization begets counter organization, and as we see today, it still occurs. But they said white backlash is not just counter organization. White backlash is something else. The embedded traditions of institutional racism being brought into the open and calling forth overt manifestations of individual racism. So, this is basically when those people that say that they're not racist and benefit from this institution are feeling a little bit too uncomfortable, and they're like, nah, hey, we ain't about to have this. And then that's when you have white rage. That's when you have Red Summer 1919. That's when you have Charlotte a few years ago, when people getting ran over with trucks. That's how you have Rittenhouse up there in Minnesota, thinking that it's okay to go up there with a militia. Go up there to a people protesting with no weapons, with weapons yourself, and then shoot them up. And technically, they did not advertise that as white on white crime. They said they didn't even put that out there like that. But let's just say that he killed a Black person. Media would have been all over that. Let's just say the revolt were flipped again, a Black person and a white person. Media would have been all over that. But they didn't say anything about that. That is white backlash right there. So they state that it's basically ludicrous for people to blame Black people for what is simply an overt manifestation of white racism. They say this is white backlash is just racism defending itself. They paraphrase MLK in saying that the protest marches were not the cause of racism, but merely exposed a long-term cancerous condition in the society. Whenever you're faced with one of the colonizers, oppressors, or someone who opposes, and they're bringing up people rioting and looting and everything, well, ask them what started that. Why are they doing that? Don't think that people just inherently want to go out and steal or go out and burn a place up. And it's not even really stealing when you actually understand the intrinsic value of this whole system. We're the ones being stolen from already, you know? Last portion was coalition. This opens up the part for the next chapter. So next time we're going to be diving into the myth of coalition. I put here, is it a feasible reality or is it just myth? We're going to find out next time. And hopefully this helps cultivate an understanding for people on how to work with other people, how we can form these coalitions so that we can coalesce towards a brighter, more altruistic future and whatnot. But until we actually have closed ranks within ourselves, that's hard to do. And they're going to explain why. All right, so we talked about the differences between white power and black power. How white power helps perpetuate the institutional racism and the oppression of other people, while black power is essentially just trying to create unity and empowerment amongst the people to actually be able to get away from being underneath the foot of their oppressor. Next, we will be checking out the Mythic Coalition and the Mississippi Freedom Democrats. If you like what you heard today, please like, comment, subscribe, and share to others that may also be some intellectuals interested in this. So remember, guys, it always starts with us. Iron sharpens iron, each one teach one. Peace.
Just waiting for the day that my people recognize revolution never end, just ain't televised. I'm just tired of asking, the answer always the same. Brothers want something to happen and we must step up for change. I'm tired. But we just playing the game and we don't know none of the rules. That's how we acquiesce, end up with less and look like some fools. I'm tired.
Tell him how you feel.